What does the Baltimore job look like to you?
I mean, the Baltimore job is really attractive, right? I would want to bring in somebody, although I guess you could make an argument for an offensive or a defensive person at this point because the defense needs a lot of work also. And you have Lamar, and you kind of figure like you could bring in a good offensive coordinator there. I think that's certainly the most attractive job. This is a weird coaching cycle, though, in that I think it sounds like Mike Tomlin is more interested in going into TV than, just jumping into another job. It sounds like Harbaugh is interested in jumping into another job. There's no chance Harbaugh's going to go to Pittsburgh, right? Like these two are not going to switch teams. There's too much water under that rivalry bridge. And so I feel like Harbaugh, I keep hearing Giants. He's meeting with the Giants today. The goal is to not let him out of the building. I could see that because they have a quarterback. From a Ravens standpoint, what is so interesting about this cycle is that I just don't think that, unlike last cycle, there aren't those guys that you're like, that's a slam dunk candidate. And there never is a coordinator who's never been a head coach who's actually literally a slam dunk. But like Ben Johnson, people were very excited to have the opportunity to hire him and take a stab at that one. Clearly, it's worked out this season. I just don't know that there's that guy this year. And so when they fired Harbaugh, that was the component that surprised me the most. Was when you make a move like this, the question you always have to have the answer to next is, and what next? And I just didn't see a clear path to the, what next for them.
I have seen the ultimate chaos scenarios, throwing Kevin Stefanski in there, where all of these AFC North coaches just swap seats in a fun little divisional game of musical chairs. I do
But
want to
also,
focus on the
like,
Pittsburgh.
that didn't work in
Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
Cleveland, so we're going to take him in
Mhm.
Baltimore? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, there's that. How do you sell that to your fans?
yeah, good rationale there. I do want to focus on the Pittsburgh side of things, though, because I've heard so much of, Pittsburgh going back to the well, of following the same formula of how they hired Tomlin, a young guy, not very well known at the time, but that was 20 years ago. What do
Yeah.
you think Pittsburgh is looking for in their next coach?
I wouldn't be surprised if it was Brian Flores, who you guys just talked about in the last segment. I've heard that name connected to Pittsburgh quite a bit, like behind the scenes, just from people that I've talked to. And I think I could see it because Brian Flores has a very specific kind of personality. And so that's not necessarily going to fit everywhere. I could kind of see that like defensive. We know he brings something special. From a coordinator standpoint, he brings something legitimately special in his area of expertise to whatever team he's going to. And I kind of think that like Pittsburgh is this, blue collar city and team that views themselves as I mean the AFC North, the black and blue division, like I could see him fitting that persona to a degree. So I think that one interests me there. Um, and I think that he does have what I would want to hear from him if I was the Steelers was a really solid explanation and self-awareness about what happened in Miami and what would be different this time. Like, and I think that that's true for every retread head coach, everyone who's had a chance that has not succeeded. I want to hear a clear, similar to what it was like for Pete Carroll. When Pete Carroll went back to the league after being at USC, after failing in the league the first time around, he was really clear about how he was different as a head coach. I covered USC at the time, and that stood out to me. I was like, it's very different. People who were like, it's not going to work in the NFL. I was like, you haven't heard him talk for 10 years. Like, it will work in the NFL because he knows why it didn't work the first time and how he pivoted after that experience. And that, I think, is the question that every team that's interviewing one of those coaches who did not succeed the first time around needs to hear a clear answer on. And he's probably more likely to have a clear answer on that than some of these guys that have had jobs more recently and just are jumping from one head coaching job to the next. Like if it's a Mike McDaniel, for instance, that's trying to be a head coach. So I very much like him in Detroit as the OC.
So stick with pivoting for a second because that's what the Eagles do every other year. Like it's like a game. They fire their offensive coordinator and then they win, then they don't win, and they fire an offensive coordinator, then they win. Like so, it's constant.
Yeah.
Patullo is the most recent sort of scapegoat from the offensive coordinator position. How much pressure does all of this put on Sirianni in your mind? And I feel weird saying that coming off of a Super Bowl just a year ago, but knowing Philly and knowing the expectations of that offense and that he is an offensive guru, is there pressure on him?
I think for sure there is. And I mean, the fact that we have conversations every year, it seems like, not literally every year, but very frequently, to the point where you're like, we're doing this again. The thing that I kept thinking all season long this season was they're gonna figure it out. We've been here before. They have figured it out before in the past. And the thing that has confused me the most is their inability to figure it out. Like the fact that they remained out of sync on offense all season long. I think ultimately Sirianni does have to answer for that. And I think that interaction that Tom Brady suggested, um, the between him and AJ Brown, Sirianni and AJ Brown, when they got in each other's face, and Brady was quick to wave it off as like they love each other. This is just what happens during the game. I think based on the way that AJ Brown was never really like consistently a part of the offense in the way that you would expect one of the best wide receivers to be. I think that what we saw in that moment was his frustration boiling over, and or reverse. I don't know whose fault it is. I just know that they're out of sync. And so maybe it's Sirianni frustrated with him that his best weapon isn't able. I think that relationship has to somehow be mended, but we've talked about it for so many years now that I am worried about its ability to be mended. And I think that ultimately that should fall on the head coach to a degree. And we do need to start having those conversations. I don't think that you need to make any rash decisions right now and just, throw the baby out with the bathwater. But I do think that, any kind of hot seat conversations that happen this offseason about him or next year being put up or shut up, I think that those are totally fair.
Is AJ Brown an Eagle next year?
Gosh, it doesn't feel like he should be right now based on the relationship, but I gotta tell you, I mean, people in Philadelphia would know more than me, right? Like I'm sitting on the opposite coast without any specific intelligence into that relationship and what actually happened. Or, we all hear talk about Jalen Hurts and like what his deficiencies may or may not be. I don't know because I'm not in the building, so I feel uncomfortable saying that. But I think that it doesn't feel like a tenable relationship right now. But I also will say, I don't know that I would feel comfortable trading away one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And I know that we didn't see that production this year, but we have in the past. And we have at SumerSports what we like to call sticky stats. Like there are stats that are more predictive at each position. And at the stats that are consistently predictive, meaning if you have a good number in this stat and this stat and this stat, you are likely to do that again the next year. He's that guy. Like at the beginning of the year, we pointed to him and said all the sticky stats point to him being one of the top 5 wide receivers in the league. We didn't see production that matched that this year. So I think that something has to go. I just don't know if I can see myself trading away AJ Brown. There might need to be other changes.
All right, Lindsay, walk me through sort of one of the crazy things we're seeing this offseason. Davis Webb, the quarterback's coach for the Broncos, got an interview with the Raiders. We've got Grant Udinski, the offensive coordinator for the Jags, getting talk from the Browns. Those two gentlemen are 30. Are you surprised to see 30-year-old coaches getting this much run this early?
I think it's a copycat league, right? And Sean McVay is incredible. And I think that what we've seen is some young coaches in recent years be particularly creative and innovative and willing to think outside the box. And I think that it's possible that that's what people are chasing. I do think that also just broadly, and not even speaking about coaches, but I think it's maybe related to a degree. I think that the NFL has changed a lot in the last 5 years in terms of the information that's available to us in order to make changes to the way that we evaluate players, in the way that we take in data and decide which data points actually matter. And if you have a ton of experience, you might be a little bit more locked into the way that you have done things, the way that you learned how to do things. These young guys, like James Gladstone in Jacksonville is a perfect example. Very young guy who came up in a system where he didn't really like, this is kind of the world that he is familiar with it from a front office standpoint. And I do think that there's some value to that. There's a lot of like what we do at Sumer with the advanced data and then, ways to use AI to incorporate into figuring out the best decisions that you can make as a coaching staff and kind of getting up to speed on some of those processes. I think that younger people, in some ways, are going to be more open to taking in some of that information. And so I do think that that's an interesting component here that people might be looking for, like some fresh ideas and some willingness to modernize the way that they look at coaching or front office decisions, things like that.
I want to zoom out a little bit and look at all nine head coaching vacancies that now exist in the NFL. Which one is the most fascinating in your opinion?
So I'm going to say this. I think that I feel like no one else is talking about this as a good job, and I understand why. So I'm going to highlight the Raiders' job for purposes of this conversation.
Please do.
You're like, I'd love to hear that argument, and I get it.
Raiders fan Fitz.
I think that it's because if you're a coach looking for a fit, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance. And I think there are a lot of openings right now where I don't see a path to a quarterback. And I keep hearing the Falcons conversation. Where's the path to a quarterback? They don't have a first round pick and they have very little salary cap space. So unless you are fully bought in on Michael Penix, or Kirk Cousins, like, where are you going to get that quarterback? I don't know that you have a chance to go over the top, and you do have a chance to come in way under expectations, and then you lose your job and you don't have a chance to build. I think that the thing that's interesting to me about the Raiders job is that they have that number 1 overall pick. And so if you're a coach that is attracted to Fernando Mendoza and what you've seen him do on the field, and you think this is a franchise quarterback that is going to be the next, one of the good guys, you can get in on the ground floor with him. You get to mold him as a quarterback and put this team on a path where there are actually very little expectation attached to that job in the short term. So in that sense, it's a little bit attractive because they're not going to pull the rug out from under you if you come in under expectations next season. Like, it would have to be very bad, like it was this year for Pete Carroll, for a coach in Oakland to lose his job right away. And I understand that I'm saying that at a time when they've fired literally every coach, like in a short period of time. But I think when you're connecting yourself to a number 1 overall pick that is a quarterback, you are putting yourself on a path to dictate what the franchise does in the first few years. And you also give yourself a longer leash with which to build that. And there are also other offensive, like, I was floored that the Raiders were as bad as they were this year. I thought that they were a team that was going to be knocking on the door of the playoffs. Like, I didn't think that they would get into the playoffs. I didn't think that was what this season was going to be, but I thought that they'd be in the conversation fighting for a spot at the end. Like, think of the offensive weapons that they have there. You've got Brock Bowers. I know they traded away Jacoby Myers. They need some help in the wide receiver room for sure. They set themselves up with that trade in part to make some of those changes. You've got Max Crosby on the defensive side of the ball. You have Ashton Genty, who is incredible. And I know that we didn't get a chance to see that production. People who play fantasy are like, oh, we underperformed. We have a scoring metric at SumerSports where we've trained a model to evaluate each player's play. And it does literally every frame of every snap and evaluates for different traits and their ability to impact that play positively. He did his job, right? Like, he just didn't have a good offensive environment around him, which always impacts the running back's production, which is why you don't draft running backs this early. So I think Ashton Genty is you've got weapons there. You can turn this around. And I'm not saying you're a Super Bowl contender next year, but you can put it on the up and up. And so in that sense, I think it's attractive. If you could have a conversation with Tom Brady, if you could have a conversation with Spytech and learn, like, we can be on the same page here. And the things that happened last year where, like, there were rumors that Pete Carroll didn't have any say about his offensive coordinator. They wanted him to bring in, why am I blanking on his name? Chip Kelly.
Kelly.
So if you can just make it clear, that's not going to happen this time. Let's all get on the same page and start building this from the ground floor. I think that that's appealing.
All right, Lindsay, you've mentioned SumerSports a couple of times. Tell everybody what they're doing and what they're offering right now.
So it's my favorite thing that we have offered, and we have been in product development like a lot for the last year. We're a very young company, but growing very fast. We have a product called Sumer Live that is a live dashboard that you can watch during the games. If you look for play-by-play or stats, that kind of stuff, this will tell you live charting data, which usually takes until the like midday of the next day for people who are into advanced stats to get that information. We can tell you coverage rates, usage and efficiency, like what's working. We can tell you routes, like what routes is this team running most frequently, and efficiency, what's the EPA on those routes. There's so much deep data that is so fascinating to watch while a game is happening. It literally goes play, it tells you what the play is, and then it tells you everything that happened on that play in the play-by-play screen. We can tell you that they were in 12 personnel, that it was a heavy box, that it was cover 3. None of these things match, I understand, but I'm just saying, like, all of those things, was there motion on the play, was there play action, that all shows up in the play-by-play box. And then to the right of the screen, you've got team tendencies that you can track that will all update before the next play actually happens. It's wild how fast we've been able, I haven't done anything about it except tell them that they should maybe think about building something like this, because I would use it. But our development team has just knocked it out of the park. And so if you go to SumerSports.com/live, we'll have every single game. The dashboard will be live for every game of the playoffs this weekend. If you want to go back and look at any of those data points from last weekend's games, they're there right now.